cowboy caught her stealing eggs, then offered her, "You want to work or wear white beside me?" The first light of morning was pale and thin across the ranch. The wind whispered over the dry grass, carrying the faint smell of earth and wood smoke. The cowboy, a man who had spent his life tending the land and the animals, rose with the sun as he always did. His boots hit the worn wooden floor of the small cabin with a soft thud, and he poured himself a cup of coffee, savoring the warmth. He liked mornings for their quiet before the world stirred with work, before voices and noise filled the day. It was in these moments that he felt steady, as if the rhythm of the ranch could keep him grounded no matter what came. By the time he had saddled his horse and walked toward the chicken coop, he expected to see the usual signs of morning. A few hens scratching in the dirt, the rooster crowing insistently, the coop door closed and secure. But as he approached, something felt off. The door hung slightly ajar, a sound of clucking louder than usual echoing in the crisp air. His hand went to the fence, gripping it as his eyes scanned the yard. That was when he saw her, a young woman, her hair tangled and dusty, crouched beside the coop with a small basket in her hands. She was gathering eggs, moving quickly, almost furtively, as if she didn't want to be seen. He froze, unsure what to do at first. It wasn't common for anyone to wander onto the ranch, let alone to take from him, but there was something in the way she moved that stopped his anger from rising immediately. She was small, and her clothes hung loosely, faded and patched. Dust clung to her sleeves, her bare hands moving with care over the delicate eggs. She looked up suddenly, eyes wide and frightened, as if she had felt him there all along. The basket wobbled in her hands, and one egg fell with a soft, terrible crack onto the dirt. "Hey!" he called, his voice steady, not loud but firm enough to carry. She flinched and stumbled backward, almost dropping the basket entirely. He dismounted and walked closer, boots crunching on the dirt, careful not to scare her further. "It's all right." "Put the basket down," he said. She hesitated, then set it at her feet, clutching the edges as if it were a lifeline. What do you want?" she asked, her voice small, uncertain, almost a whisper. He studied her for a moment. Hunger showed in the hollow of her cheeks, in the dull weariness in her eyes. She wasn't a thief in the usual sense. She was desperate. He could see it in the way her hands shook, in the way she avoided his gaze.
"You don't belong here," he said slowly.
"Why are you taking eggs?" She swallowed hard. I'm hungry," she admitted, her voice barely audible. "I haven't eaten in days." The words trembled out, fragile and human. There was no shame, only a quiet, raw need. The cowboy felt a tug in his chest, a mixture of anger, worry, and something else he didn't immediately name. He had seen hunger before. The land was harsh, unforgiving. People struggled. But he had never caught anyone like this, so young, so worn by circumstance, yet moving with care and caution, as if each egg mattered more than herself. "You shouldn't be here," he said again, softer this time. "You could get hurt. The hens could peck, and you could fall. Why not ask for help instead of taking?" Her eyes filled with tears, and she looked away, ashamed. "There's no one to ask," she said. "No family, no home, nothing. She stopped, trembling. The wind swept her hair across her face, and he noticed how thin she was, how delicate her frame seemed compared to the hard land she crouched on. The cowboy let out a quiet sigh. "I can't let you go hungry," he said, "but you can't keep taking what isn't yours. You need food, yes, but stealing won't solve that." He stepped closer, though he kept a careful distance, wanting to show no threat, only intention. She nodded, biting her lip, unsure what to do next. The basket still sat at her feet, eggs wobbling inside, one cracked on the dirt. She didn't move. Her hands shook slightly as she reached down, brushing some of the broken shell away. "Here," he said, pulling a loaf of bread from his coat and some cheese wrapped in cloth. "Eat this. Sit for a moment." She hesitated, then slowly sat on the ground, knees drawn up. She took the bread, trembling hands breaking it apart. The first bite made her eyes water, not from sadness, but relief. Hunger was a sharp, cruel thing, and for a moment it softened her expression. She chewed slowly, looking up at him occasionally. I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean, I just transled off, lost in the cold morning air." "I know," he said. "I can see that." He leaned against the fence, watching her. He had been alone on the ranch for years. The work was steady, the animals predictable. But something about seeing her there, hungry and desperate, stirred a part of him he hadn't thought about in a long time. Concern. Dull. Responsibility. Something quiet but insistent. She finished the bread, wiping crumbs from her hands, and looked at him with a hesitant curiosity. Why are you, helping me?" she asked. He shrugged lightly. "Because no one should go hungry if I can stop it. And because you're not a bad person. You're just in a hard spot." The morning stretched on in a quiet rhythm. The sun rose higher, warming the yard and casting long shadows. The hens clucked and scratched. The rooster crowed again, and the wind carried the smell of earth and straw. She sat for a while longer, unsure if she should leave, unsure if she could trust this man who had seen her at her weakest and still offered kindness. Finally, he spoke again. "Go home if you have one. If not, well, you can stay a little while. There's work to do later, if you want it. But don't steal again." She nodded, unsure what to say. The basket of eggs remained at her side, untouched, as if her pride had returned just enough to leave it alone. "Thank you," she whispered. Words small but heavy with meaning. He gave a small nod, the kind that didn't promise anything, only acknowledged her presence and choice.
"Don't thank me yet," he said. "Just
take care of yourself." She watched him mount his horse and ride back toward the fields, heart pounding. The world seemed a little wider than before, a little more possible. She had been caught in a desperate moment, but the reaction had not been anger or punishment. Instead, it was something unexpected, a chance to be seen as human, to have someone recognize her struggle without condemning her for it. As she walked away from the coop, the basket of eggs in hand, she felt a strange mix of shame and hope. Shame for what she had done, hope for the possibility that the world could offer something other than hunger and fear. The cowboy watched her from a distance, knowing he might never see her again, yet feeling an unspoken connection that neither of them fully understood. The morning continued as it always had, with work waiting and chores to be done. But something subtle had shifted in the quiet of that first encounter. Two lives, each shaped by hardship and solitude, had intersected for a brief moment. And in that intersection, a seed of trust, of possibility, had been planted. For the cowboy, it was a reminder that the land was not the only thing that needed tending. For the young woman, it was a glimpse of safety she had not known in years. And for both, it was a morning neither would forget. A morning that began with stolen eggs and ended with something far more valuable. A chance to be seen, to be understood, and to start a story neither had expected to begin. The morning after she had been caught stealing eggs, the young woman wandered along the dirt road just beyond the ranch. Her basket, now lighter after the breakfast the cowboy had given her, swung carefully at her side. She had slept poorly, the cold night air pressing against her thin clothes, but the memory of his calm voice and steady presence stayed with her. It was strange, this feeling. Someone could see her, not just as a thief or a troublemaker, but as a human being. She had never known that before. Most people looked at her and saw hunger, weakness, or trouble. Rarely had anyone looked and simply understood. Meanwhile, the cowboy went about his usual work. He tended the cattle, repaired fences, and moved supplies from one part of the ranch to another. Yet, even as he worked, his thoughts kept returning to her. The way she had crouched by the chicken coop, careful not to break the eggs, had struck him. She hadn't been careless. She had been desperate, yes, but careful. That meant something. That meant she had a sense of dignity, even in hardship. And that mattered to him. By mid-morning, he had made a decision. He mounted his horse and rode slowly toward the edge of town, where he had seen her wandering. He found her sitting on a fence post, staring out over the fields, the sun warming her back. She looked small against the wide landscape, as if the world itself might crush her. But there was also a stubbornness in her posture, a strength that had survived long days and nights of struggle. "You hungry?" he called gently as he approached. She looked up quickly, eyes wide. For a moment, she thought he might be angry for leaving so soon, or for returning too early, but the softness in his tone calmed her. I can manage," she said, though her stomach protested the lie. He dismounted, tying his horse to a post. "You'll manage better with food and a roof over your head," he said simply. "I have work that needs doing. It's not easy, but it's fair. You do the work. You eat. You rest. Nothing more, nothing less." She hesitated, unsure if she could trust such an offer. Most people made promises they didn't keep. Most people turned kindness into expectation, or used it as a tool for control. But there was something different in his eyes. Steadiness, honesty, a calm that wasn't trying to impress or frighten her. She nodded slowly, her mind racing with questions. "Okay," she whispered. I'll try." The first tasks were simple but tiring. She swept the barn, carried buckets of water, and fed the chickens with the care she had shown before. Her hands, though small, moved with precision. She noticed the way he watched her, not to criticize, but to observe, to make sure she could manage without overdoing herself. And as she worked, the sun rose higher, casting light across the ranch that made the land feel alive in a way she had rarely experienced. Over the next few days, the routine became clearer. Each morning she rose with the sun, and he met her with instructions for the day. They spoke little at first, their communication more through gestures and shared understanding than words. She noticed the patterns in the animals, the way the cattle moved and grazed, the habits of the horses, the subtle changes in the weather. He noticed her attentiveness, her patience, and the quiet determination she carried even when tired. Town people began to notice her presence at the ranch. Some whispered, wondering who she was, where she came from, and why the cowboy allowed her there. Rumors started, as they always did, but the cowboy paid them little mind. He had known suspicion before, had felt the weight of judgment in a small community. He understood the eyes on them, but he also understood the truth. She was here because she had no other place to go, and he had offered her a chance to work honestly and live safely. As the days passed, small moments began to build trust between them. She learned the rhythm of the ranch, the careful balance required to care for animals, the patience needed to work the land. He began to teach her, showing rather than telling, letting her try and correcting gently when she made mistakes. There were times she was frustrated, wiping sweat from her brow, thinking she could not continue, but he never rushed her or scolded her. He simply waited, steady, allowing her to learn at her own pace. One afternoon, as she carried a heavy bucket of water to the barn, she stumbled slightly, spilling some of the water. She froze, embarrassed, expecting the sharp rebuke she had known all her life. But he only nodded, calmly. "Steady," he said. "Try again. No anger, no frustration, just patience." That small act, simple as it was, spoke volumes to her. For the first time, she felt the possibility of belonging somewhere, even in a place that had seemed harsh and unforgiving. Evenings were quieter. After the work was done, they shared simple meals of bread, cheese, and whatever the land provided. Sometimes they spoke, sometimes they sat in silence. The quiet felt natural, not awkward. She began to ask questions about the ranch, the animals, and the seasons. He answered, sharing what he knew without pretension or pride. There was a slow, gentle exchange of knowledge and trust that grew in the spaces between words. She also began to notice his habits, how he rose before dawn without complaint, how he treated the animals with respect, how he maintained the land with care. She began to understand that life on the ranch was hard, not because it was meant to punish, but because it demanded attention, patience, and responsibility. And she began to understand that he respected her, not just for the work she did, but for the person she was. That realization surprised her. She had long expected to be overlooked, dismissed, or used. Here she was seen. One evening, after the sun had dipped behind the hills and the air had grown cooler, she found herself alone in the barn, sweeping the floor. He stood nearby, mending a fence. She paused and looked at him, unsure if she could voice the thought in her mind. "Why are you letting me stay?" she asked softly. He didn't look up immediately. He worked with steady, deliberate movements. Finally, he spoke. "Because you need a chance," he said simply. "Because you're not asking for charity. You're willing to work. And because no one should go hungry when I can help." His voice carried no pride or grandiosity. It was matter-of-fact, honest. She nodded, unsure if she could fully understand. She had known hardship, loneliness, and the cold judgment of others. This was something different. It wasn't a loan. It wasn't a favor. It was a choice, his choice to let her be, to allow her to exist in this space without fear, without shame. The days turned into weeks. She became stronger, more confident in her movements and decisions. She learned to carry the buckets with ease, to guide the animals without hesitation, to anticipate the needs of the ranch. He continued to observe, correct gently, and offer advice when necessary. In return, she learned patience, endurance, and a quiet pride in her work. It was not a perfect relationship. There were moments of frustration, when she spilled water, when a horse refused to cooperate, when she underestimated the weight of a task. There were moments of exhaustion, when the sun beat down and the work seemed endless. But through it all, there was a growing respect and understanding between them, a silent acknowledgement that they were learning from each other. By the end of the second month, the young woman had changed. She stood taller, moved with confidence, and spoke with more assurance. She had found a rhythm in the ranch that matched her own inner strength, and the cowboy had changed too. His life, which had been steady and solitary, now carried a new awareness of care and responsibility for someone beyond himself. One morning, as the rooster crowed and the sun painted the hills in shades of gold, he watched her move among the chickens, her hands steady and sure. He realized quietly that what had started as an offer of work had grown into something more profound. She wasn't just surviving, she was thriving. And in helping her, he too had found a renewed sense of purpose, a reminder that life, even on the harshest land, could be tempered with patience, trust, and kindness. The world beyond the ranch still waited, with its judgment and whispers, but here, in this space, a fragile partnership had begun. Not of romance, not of obligation, but of shared effort and understanding. And for both of them, that was enough to keep going, day after day, through sweat, dust, and the rising sun. The days turned into weeks, and the ranch settled into a rhythm that was almost like a quiet music. The young woman had learned the chores well, feeding the animals, carrying water, gathering eggs, and helping mend fences. She moved through the work with a quiet confidence, though she still carried a certain wariness in her eyes. Trust did not come quickly for her. It had been earned slowly, piece by piece, in small gestures and steady patience. And he had given her the space to grow into it. The cowboy watched her as she worked. He noticed the little things, the way her hands cradled the animals, how she remembered each of their habits, how she adjusted her movements to avoid startling the horses. He also noticed how she sometimes hesitated before speaking, as if measuring her words carefully. She was not silent out of fear alone. She was careful because words mattered, and trust had to be given slowly, just as he had learned to earn it from life. One afternoon, a storm began to build on the horizon. The wind picked up, carrying dust and the sharp scent of coming rain. He called her in from the field, and together they secured the animals and the barns. The sky darkened, heavy with clouds, and the first drops began to fall. The sound of rain against the tin roofs was loud, and the wind rattled the windows of the cabin. Most people would have found it frightening, but she felt a strange comfort in the storm, knowing she was not alone. He moved calmly around the ranch, his hands sure and steady, guiding her through each task, showing her how to brace the doors, stack hay, and protect the smaller animals. Through the work, she began to notice more about him, not just his skill and strength, but his quiet patience, the way he considered each decision carefully, how he did not rush, how he watched the weather, the animals, and her without ever seeming to judge. For her, it was a new way of being seen, not criticized, not ignored, but observed with care and respect. And in turn, she learned to trust him more, seeing that his calm demeanor was genuine and not a facade. Life on the ranch was not without its challenges. She made mistakes, spilling water, dropping tools, misjudging the timing to feed the animals, but he corrected her gently. "Try again," he would say. "It's all right. You'll get it." The patience he showed made her realize that learning was not something to be rushed. She began to take pride in each small success, each chore completed correctly, each animal fed on time, and with that pride came a sense of belonging. She was not just a visitor or a temporary helper. She was becoming part of the rhythm of the ranch, of the land itself. In the evenings, they shared simple meals, bread, cheese, and sometimes stew made from whatever the land provided. They spoke of practical things, weather, the care of animals, upcoming repairs needed on fences or barns, but slowly their conversations began to touch on more personal matters. She asked about his past, how he had come to live alone on this ranch, how he learned to care for the land. He answered, carefully, sharing what felt important, leaving out nothing cruel but speaking only of the hard lessons he had learned. She began to see that his life had not been easy. There had been loss, disappointment, loneliness, but he had found a way to keep moving forward, with patience and diligence. She shared small things of her own, though cautiously. Stories of childhood, of hardship, of days when food was scarce and nights were long. Each story was a fragment, shared slowly, as if she feared giving too much away. But he listened, never interrupting, never judging. And in that listening, a bond grew, not of romance yet, not of passion, but of understanding. Two people shaped by struggle, slowly recognizing the same kind of resilience in each other. One afternoon, while mending a section of the fence, she lost her balance and almost fell into the mud. He reached her quickly, steadying her with his hands. "Careful," he said. "The ground is slick. Watch your step." His touch was brief, practical, but it carried reassurance. She realized she could rely on him, not to save her from everything, but to be there when needed, to steady her when she faltered. That small moment was significant. She had learned in life that help was rarely given freely. Yet here it was, offered without demand or judgment. As the weeks turned into months, the ranch became a place of routine, but not monotony. There was always work to do, tasks to manage, animals to care for. But within that routine, small moments of quiet connection appeared. A glance shared over a row of horses, a nod of approval after a job well done, a silent understanding in the middle of a difficult task. Words were not always necessary. The presence of each other, steady and reliable, was enough. The townspeople continued to whisper. They noticed her there, noticed the way she moved with the animals, the way he allowed her to be present. Some spoke in judgment, some in curiosity, but neither of them paid much attention. The life they were building on the ranch existed outside of rumor and speculation. It was grounded in effort, respect, and the slow, steady growth of trust. One evening after the sun had dipped behind the hills and painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, they sat on the porch of the cabin. The air was cool, and the smell of rain from earlier in the day still lingered in the grass. She watched the horizon, the way the light touched the rolling hills, the animals grazing quietly in the distance. For a long time, neither spoke. The quiet was comfortable, familiar, and unforced. Finally, she turned to him. I never thought anyone would give me a chance like this," she said softly. Her voice was low, filled with wonder and uncertainty. He nodded slowly. "Not everyone does," he said. "But sometimes people see what others miss. I saw that you were trying, even when it was hard. That matters." Her hands rested on her lap, fingers twisting slightly. "It's not just that," she whispered. "It's the way you let me be. You don't judge. You just guide." He looked at her, not speaking at first. He had learned long ago that words could be heavy, sometimes heavier than needed. Finally, he said, "I've seen people judged their whole lives, and I know it doesn't help. Sometimes steady hands and steady hearts are better than words." She nodded, feeling the truth in that. It was strange, this sense of safety, this realization that she could be herself here, without fear. She had survived long enough to know that safety was rare, that kindness was rare, that trust was rarer still. And yet, here it was, offered freely, without strings, without expectation, without demand. The days continued in their steady rhythm. She worked hard, learning more each day, and he continued to watch, guide, and correct when needed. Their bond grew quietly, not in grand gestures, but in the accumulation of small moments. A shared task done well, a problem solved together, a meal eaten in companionable silence. The ranch was no longer just land and animals. It was a place of shared effort, of mutual respect, of slowly building trust. Sometimes, at the end of a long day, She would sit quietly and watch him move among the animals, noticing the ease of his movements, the way he spoke softly to the horses, the care he gave to each task. And she began to feel something she had not known in a long time. Hope. Not hope of escape, not hope of fortune, but hope that life could be lived with dignity, with effort, with connection, that she could belong somewhere, even if only for now. The cowboy noticed the subtle changes in her, too. The way she carried herself with more confidence, the small smile that occasionally touched her lips, the light in her eyes that spoke of quiet satisfaction and pride. She was no longer just a stranger or a helper. She was part of the rhythm of the ranch, a presence that mattered, a companion in the daily work and quiet moments. And as the sun set each evening, painting the sky in fading gold and soft pink, there was a mutual understanding between them. They did not need to speak of it aloud. They were learning to trust, to rely on each other, and to find comfort in the steady, predictable rhythm of work and quiet companionship. The world outside could wait, with its judgment and gossip. Here they had found something rare: steady hands, steady hearts, and the beginnings of a bond built on respect, care, and shared effort. The late afternoon sun was warm but low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the ranch. The young woman had just finished feeding the last of the chickens, her hands sticky with grains and her sleeves damp from wiping sweat. She looked across the yard, where the cowboy was repairing a section of fence that had weakened in the last storm. He moved with calm precision, hammer in hand, focused on each nail and plank as if nothing else in the world mattered. She watched quietly, her chest tightening, with a feeling she didn't fully understand. It was a mix of admiration, respect, and a kind of unease she had not felt before. She had spent months on the ranch now, learning the land, the animals, and the rhythms of work. Each day had brought new challenges and small triumphs. She had grown stronger and more confident, but there was a subtle tension building inside her. A question she had been avoiding. What did this life mean? Was she here just to work? Or was there something more expected? Something she had not yet been asked to consider? She did not know how to answer, nor did she know if she even wanted to. The cowboy finally noticed her standing at the edge of the yard. He set down the hammer and wiped his hands on a rag. "You've done well today," he said, his voice low and even. She nodded, brushing a strand of hair from her face. She wanted to speak, but the words stuck in her throat. She wasn't sure where to begin. He studied her for a moment, as if reading the unspoken question in her eyes. "Sit for a bit," he said, gesturing toward a bench near the barn. She hesitated, then obeyed, lowering herself onto the worn wood. The air was warm from the sun, and the ranch smelled of hay, dust, and the faint aroma of cooking stew from the cabin.
"I need to ask you something," he said, finally breaking the silence. She felt a nervous flutter in her stomach.
He had always been calm, measured, and careful with his words. When he spoke seriously, it meant something important. "You don't have to answer right away," he continued. "Take your time." She nodded, listening intently. "I've given you work here, and you've done well. You've shown patience, skill, and strength." But his voice trailed slightly, as if he were weighing each word carefully. "There's more to this than just work. The people around here, the town, they notice things. And if you stay, there will be questions. There always are." She looked down at her hands, twisting the rough cloth of her sleeve. She had known it would not be simple. Life outside had never been kind, and she had learned to survive quietly, without drawing attention. But now, attention was inevitable. She felt a mixture of fear and uncertainty rising in her chest I don't want you to leave, he said. Not because I need help, but because I value having you here. You're steady, careful, and reliable, but there's another option. He paused, letting the words settle. You can continue the work, live here, and keep your independence as much as possible. Or you can take a different step, one that would give you safety, respect, and a place in this life in a way that no one could question. She looked up, heart racing. The meaning of his words slowly sank in. He was not speaking of trivial matters. He was speaking of a commitment, of a bond that went beyond work, beyond routine. What? She had not anticipated this. Her mind swirled with thoughts, fear of the unknown, hope for safety, the weight of choice.
You mean marriage?
She asked, her voice barely audible. He nodded, serious but gentle. Yes, that's the choice. You can keep working, and life will continue as it has. Or you can choose this. I am not asking lightly. This would mean something permanent. It would mean trust, respect, and partnership. But it is your decision. No one will force you. Her hands trembled slightly. She had never been asked to make such a choice. She had survived alone for so long, relying on herself. And yet here was a man offering stability, safety, and something she had never even dared to hope for, a place to belong. She started, then paused, struggling to find words. I don't know if I'm ready. If I can? He shook his head gently. I'm not asking for an answer today. I just want you to think. Take the time you need. But know this, whatever you decide, you are respected, and you will not be forced. The honesty in his words struck her. She had been so used to being pressured, used, judged. But here was someone offering choice, freedom within boundaries, respect even in the face of uncertainty. She felt something she had not known for years, relief. Relief that she could make a decision without fear of reprisal, without coercion, without shame. For the next few days, life continued as usual, but the question lingered between them like an unspoken current. She went about her chores, feeding the animals, mending fences, gathering eggs, but her thoughts kept returning to the choice. She thought of her life before, the long stretches of hunger, fear, and loneliness. She thought of the steady rhythm of the ranch, of the patience he had shown, of the trust that had grown between them, and slowly, the idea that she could step into a new life without fear, without shame, began to take root. One evening, after a long day's work, they sat together on the porch, watching the sun dip behind the hills. The sky was a brilliant mix of gold and pink, the animals settling into the shadows. As she finally found the courage to speak. I've been thinking about what you said, she began, her voice soft but steady. About the choice, about the work, about staying here. I don't know if I'm ready for the second option, but I know I trust you, and I feel safe here in a way I haven't felt in years. He nodded, listening carefully. Safety is important, he said, but it's also your choice. You need to decide what's right for you, not what you think I want. She looked at him, seeing the quiet patience in his eyes, the way he waited without pressure, the way he allowed her space to make her decision. It was not weakness or uncertainty. It was respect, steady and firm. She realized then that the offer was not just about safety or security. It was about trust, about shared effort, and about recognizing each other as equals. The night fell slowly, the stars appearing one by one in the clear sky. They continued to sit in companionable silence, listening to the distant sounds of the animals settling for the night, the soft rustle of the wind through the trees, the faint call of an owl somewhere in the distance. The quiet was comfortable, not awkward, filled with unspoken understanding. She thought about the future, about the unknown, about what it might mean to take that step. She also thought about the man beside her, whose steady presence had become a part of her daily life, whose patience and honesty had built trust in a way no one else had. The thought of stepping into a life together was frightening, yes, but also filled with a sense of possibility she had not known before. By the end of the night, she had not made a final decision, but she felt something important, the ability to choose, the power to consider her life not just as a series of hardships, but as a place where trust, respect, and safety could exist. And for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to feel a quiet hope, a hope that life could be steady, kind, and full of meaning, even after years of struggle. The cowboy, for his part, knew that the decision would take time. He had seen the strength in her, the care she gave to every task, the way she carried herself with determination and dignity. He understood that trust was not given lightly, and that choice carried weight, and so he waited steady and patient, offering his hand and his respect, knowing that when she was ready the answer would come, not forced, not demanded, but freely given. The ranch was quiet now, the animals settled, the wind soft against the hills. Two people, shaped by hardship and effort, sat together on the porch, sharing the silence, sharing the moment. There was tension, yes, but also trust. Fear, yes, but also hope. And in that balance they found something neither had expected, the possibility of a future built not on necessity alone, but on mutual respect, understanding, and the quiet bond that had grown through months of shared work and steady presence. The next morning, the ranch was bathed in soft light. The sun had barely risen, and the world smelled fresh with the promise of a new day. The young woman woke early, as she always did, but today was different. There was a weight in her chest, a quiet tension mixed with anticipation. The choice she had been considering for weeks pressed gently upon her, and she knew it could no longer wait. She dressed quickly, her movements careful, precise, as if each action might prepare her for the decision she had been avoiding. Breakfast was simple. Bread, cheese, and a few eggs she had collected herself. She ate slowly, tasting each bite, feeling the warmth of the food in her stomach. She had worked hard for this morning, not just in chores, but in thought. She had weighed fear against hope, past against future, independence against security, and finally, she felt ready to face it. The cowboy was already in the yard, inspecting the fence along the northern edge of the property. He looked up as she approached, his expression steady and calm, as it always was. He did not rush her, did not speak before she was ready. That patience had been his gift all along, and now it allowed her to gather her courage. I need to talk to you," she said, her voice low but steady. He nodded, setting down his tools and walking slowly toward her. The morning air was cool, the ground firm beneath their boots. "I'm listening," he said, his voice even, calm, giving her the space to speak without pressure. She took a deep breath, feeling the rhythm of the ranch around her, the soft cluck of the chickens, the distant lowing of cattle, the wind brushing over the hills. "I've thought about what you asked," she began, "about the choice, about staying here and everything. And I've realized something. I want to stay. Not just for work. Not just for safety, but because I trust you. And because I want to belong here, in a place that has given me respect and care." He looked at her, his eyes calm but attentive, as if reading the truth in her words. He did not smile immediately, for he had learned that trust and decisions were serious matters. But there was relief there, a quiet acknowledgement that she had considered her life carefully and had chosen deliberately. "That's your choice," he said slowly.
And it's respected. You're not taking this step because you feel forced.
You're taking it because you believe it's right for you. That makes all the difference.
She nodded, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. For years she had been shaped by fear, by hunger, by the need to survive alone. Now she was choosing a path not dictated by desperation, but by trust, by understanding, by the recognition that she could build a life that mattered. The cowboy walked closer and extended his hand, not in command, not in expectation, but in partnership. "Then we'll move forward together," he said, "as equals, as partners. We'll build this life, this ranch, together. Work and care and respect will guide us." Her hand found his, and for the first time she felt a sense of stability she had never known. It was not grand or dramatic. There were no speeches or proclamations. It was simple, quiet, and real. Two people shaped by hardship, choosing to step forward together, grounded in effort, respect, and trust. The following weeks were filled with a new kind of routine. They continued the chores, the feedings, the repairs, and the work that kept the ranch alive. But now there was a deeper sense of purpose in everything they did. Tasks that had once been purely functional now carried meaning, each act a symbol of partnership and shared responsibility. She felt stronger, more confident, and more connected to the land, the animals, and to him. The townspeople began to notice a subtle change too. They no longer whispered merely about her presence. They noticed the rhythm, a calm efficiency with which she worked, and the quiet respect between her and the cowboy. Some were curious, others judgmental, but their opinions mattered less. She had found her place here, and that was enough. Evenings became a time for reflection and quiet companionship. After the animals were settled and the chores completed, they would sit together on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in soft shades of orange, pink, and gold. Conversation flowed more freely now, not out of necessity, but out of choice. She spoke of dreams she had once thought impossible, of hopes for the future, and he shared his vision for the ranch, his plans, and his careful observations of the land and seasons. They began to notice each other in small ways, how she laughed quietly when a chicken startled him, how he paused to listen to her insights about the animals. The trust and respect that had grown slowly over months now carried with it a deeper connection, one built not on romance alone, but on partnership, shared experience, and understanding. One morning, after a heavy rain, the sun broke through the clouds, casting warm light across the wet grass. She walked through the yard, feeling the soft mud beneath her boots, the freshness in the air, and a sense of belonging she had never known. She paused at the edge of the field and looked at him, who was repairing the fence with quiet determination. The thought came to her naturally, unforced. This was her home. This was where she belonged. She moved closer, her steps soft on the damp earth. "Thank you," she said simply, "for giving me a chance, for trusting me, for letting me choose." He looked up, meeting her gaze steadily.
You earned it,
He said.
not because I decided, but because you proved yourself, day by day, with your effort, your patience, and your trust.
That's what matters. The words warmed her, but more than that, they grounded her. She realized that her life had been changed not by a single act of kindness, but by months of steady effort, mutual respect, and patient understanding. Trust was built slowly, and now she could feel the strength of it, solid and unwavering. Days passed, and the seasons slowly shifted. The land grew warmer, crops began to grow, and the animals thrived under their joint care. She found pride in her work, in her choices, in her presence. No longer merely surviving, she was building a life, together with someone who valued her, who respected her, and who had offered her the chance to belong. Even when the work was hard, when the sun was hot and the chores long, she no longer felt alone. The cowboy's steady presence beside her gave her courage. The ranch, once just a stretch of land, had become a place of home, of purpose, and of partnership. And one quiet evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills and the world seemed to hold its breath, they sat together on the porch, the animals settled, the work of the day complete. The wind rustled the trees gently, carrying the scent of earth and grass. She looked at him, not with fear or uncertainty, but with calm recognition. Here was someone who had seen her, trusted her, and offered her a life she had never imagined. "I'm ready," she whispered. He nodded, understanding the depth behind the simple words. It was not just a promise or an agreement, it was a choice, freely made, with thought, courage, and hope. "And I'll be here," he said quietly, "every step, together." In that moment, the past, the fear, the hunger, the loneliness seemed far away. The future stretched before them, uncertain, yet full of promise. Together they faced it with steady hands and steady hearts, knowing that life on the ranch, hard as it could be, was now shared, supported, and strengthened by trust, effort, and choice. For the young woman, the stolen eggs, the hunger, and the desperate mornings were no longer defining moments. They had led her here, to a place of safety, respect, and belonging. For the cowboy, years of solitude, of quiet work and steady care, had brought him someone worthy of trust, someone who could share in the rhythm of life and the burdens of the land. And as the sun disappeared completely behind the hills, leaving a sky of deep blue and early stars, they sat side by side in quiet satisfaction. The ranch, the animals, the land, all of it was alive, not just with nature, but with the bond they had built. A life hard-earned, chosen deliberately, and lived with honesty, patience, and care. A life shared, and in that quiet, steady moment, it was clear. The choice she had made was not about fear or need. It was about trust, respect, and hope. And for the first time in many years, she felt truly at home.